The Mongol Empire transformed the previously closed agricultural civilization of the Central Plain into the protagonist of a massive single market spanning Eurasia. Without the logistics, jam, and currency, silver standard, established by the Mongols, the goods of the Central Plain could never have reached the world so extensively. By combining the capital of the Central Plain with the technology of the West, the Mongols created the preeminent scientific and technological state of the era. This represented a peak of global standards that Chinese history could hardly have reached indigenously. The fact that subsequent dynasties rebuilt walls and closed their doors serves as counter-evidence of their lack of capacity to maintain the open system built by the Mongols. The Kurultai held along the Onan River in 1206 was not merely the formation of a tribal alliance, it was the founding general meeting of a massive corporate entity known as Yeke Mongol Ulus, the Great Mongol State, aimed at integrating all of Eurasia into a single economic zone. To Chinggis Khan, the Jin dynasty to the south and Western Shah were like vast external assets used to procure the capital and technology necessary for the empire's expansion. In 1211, the Mongol army advanced toward Yehuling, where the Jin dynasty's elite force of 400,000 was stationed. Despite their numerical inferiority, the Mongol cavalry maximized their mobility to instantly collapse the Jin's command structure. The capture of Zhongdu, Beijing, in 1215 proved how powerless the defensive systems of agricultural dynasties which sustained the Central Plain were against the mobile capital of nomadic peoples. Usually, leaders of foreign tribes who conquered the Central Plain wanted to sit in ornate palaces, wear Chinese-style robes, and be called emperor. However, Chinggis Khan was different. At that time, becoming the emperor of China meant observing complex Confucian rituals, managing a massive bureaucratic organization, and living confined within city walls. Chinggis Khan viewed this as a trap that erodes a warrior's wild instinct. Even after capturing Beijing, he did not settle there. Instead, he returned to his tent, Gair, on the steppe to command the entire empire. To him, Beijing was not a sovereign capital, but a logistics terminal for consolidating seized resources. He focused on securing gold, silver, silk, and engineers necessary for the empire's growth phase rather than on complex administration. Instead of politics involving staying within city walls to rule the people, he chose effective ownership, selecting only valuable assets to move back to the empire's headquarters. When Chinggis Khan captured a city, the first thing he did was classify the survivors. While royalty, nobility, and Confucian scholars were often eliminated without mercy, artisans and engineers who got oil and soil on their hands were targets of the Khan's special protection. Gathering artisans before the city gates, he categorized them into carpenters, blacksmiths, weavers, and gunpowder experts. Instead of death, they were incorporated into the Mongol army's special technical units and transported to the empire's headquarters along with their families. They were granted privileges in Mongol society called Darkhan. This allowed them to be exempt from taxes and receive the Khan's direct protection, focusing solely on creating the empire's weaponry and infrastructure. Chinggis Khan did not limit technology merely to weaponry. He also actively imported administrative technology and financial technology. Originally, the Mongol language had no script. The Khan borrowed the Uyghur script to record the empire's codes of law and ledgers. He possessed a management mindset that information not recorded is not an asset. He also recruited savvy Muslim merchants to manage imperial taxes and design long-distance trade systems. These individuals would later become the core brains leading the monetary economy of the Yuan dynasty. Ultimately, to Chinggis Khan, the Central Plain was like a massive factory with high maintenance costs to operate directly. Thus, instead of staying on site as a factory manager, he harvested only the core components and profits generated by the factory and sent them back to the headquarters, the steppe. As Chinggis Khan carried out his wars of conquests, he had to station military overseers in the occupied cities. These individuals were the origin of the darugachi. At that time, a darugachi was less a sophisticated administrator and more akin to a military commander or an occupational watchdog. Their primary mission was to prevent rebellions and supervise the transport of looted spoils or tribute back to the homeland. After the death of Chinggis Khan, the second great Khan, Ogedei, followed the proposal of Yellow Chusai and overhauled the tax system in the 1230s. From this point on, the Darugachi moved beyond being mere watchdogs and were deployed to each province and county as the heads of official administrative bodies. An approval system was completed at this time, where the administrative tasks handled by local officials, such as the Han Chinese, would only take effect once the Mongol Darugachi affixed the final seal. By the era of Ogedei Khan, the overseer system introduced by Chinggis Khan had been perfected into a nationwide administrative approval system.
Chinggis Khan prioritized those with hard skills, even if they possessed moral flaws. The primary principles for recruitment were mathematical calculation skills capable of bringing down city walls, accounting abilities to feed a massive army, and linguistic skills to bridge disparate cultures. Chinggis Khan maximized the operational efficiency of the Central Plain Division by deploying recruited talent to the most suitable departments based on their ethnicity and background. He deployed Han Chinese engineers to graft the high-tech weaponry of settled civilizations onto the Mongol legions. With Uyghur and Muslim merchants who were adept at numbers, he organized the empire's ledgers and created operation manuals for the system connecting vast territories. To Chinggis Khan, the Central Plain was not a nation with independent sovereignty. He treated the Central Plain as a core subsidiary of the massive holding company known as the Empire. The goods of the Central Plain began to flow along the steppe routes paved by the Mongols, and the profits generated in this process filled the empire's coffers. This was the grand beginning of the Eurasian standardization strategy that would come to full bloom during the era of Kublai Khan.
Ogedei and Möngke's world conquest.
The JAM system, established by the Mongol Empire, was an innovative national management infrastructure comparable to modern high-speed internet networks or large-scale logistics terminals. Ogedei Khan standardized this system across Eurasia, maximizing the operational efficiency of the massive corporate entity that was the empire. The postal stations were a type of data relay station installed approximately 40 kilometers. Couriers carrying the paisa, the Khan's emblem, seal, could run without rest, receiving fresh horses and food at these locations. Distances that would take a typical army or merchant's months to cover were traversed by JAM couriers in just a few days. This meant that critical information, such as news of rebellions across the empire or fluctuations in market prices, was updated in the Great Khan's office in real time. The paisa can be viewed as an all-access authorization pass to freely navigate the vast global network of the Mongol Empire, essentially a combination of a modern diplomatic passport and an unlimited corporate card. The golden paisa was a gold plate engraved with a lion's head, held only by direct imperial couriers or the highest-ranking officials. Presenting this plate allowed for the immediate conscription of thousands of horses and troops anywhere in the empire. The silver and bronze paisas were used by general couriers or officials performing public duties, granting the authority to receive fresh horses and food immediately at any postal station. Identical paisa and JAM regulations were applied wherever one went in the empire. This signifies that a unified administrative system was laid across all of Eurasia. Thanks to this, the Mongols could grasp the situation of the Central Plain Division thousands of kilometers away as if it were in the palm of their hand, without ever leaving their seats.
The JAM was not merely a place for transporting information. It was the logistical artery through which the empire's resources flowed. As security was ensured through the JAM system, Eastern silk and ceramics poured into the Islamic world and Europe. Instead of collecting tolls for merchants passing through these routes, the Mongols guaranteed their absolute safety. In essence, a form of free trade zone was established. While past dynasties of the Central Plain focused on internal consumption, the Central Plain under Mongol rule transformed into a massive production factory targeting the global market. With the highway of the JAM system laid down, goods from the Central Plain became the most valuable global commodities throughout Eurasia. The JAM system was the economic driving force that allowed the Mongol Empire to maintain its vast territories. As the entirety of Eurasia was tied into a single network, transaction costs were dramatically lowered.
Through the jam, the Mongols monopolized information on global goods and technological trends. By identifying which regions lacked silver and which had surplus silk, the Mongols utilized this knowledge to reap enormous profits from intermediary trade.
After conquering the Central Plain, the Mongols pushed the Han Chinese intellectuals, the literati, who made up the majority of the population, out of the core of administration. The void they left was filled by the Semuren, people with colored eyes from Central and Western Asia. These were merchant groups who had engaged in East-West trade for generations. Instead of complex Confucian classics, they were fluent in arithmetic, accounting, exchange rates, and logistics. From the Mongol perspective, these economic experts who could immediately fill the empire's coffers were far more capable partners than scholars who were merely good with words. The Mongol imperial family lent capital to Semuren merchants and encouraged trade. The Semuren became the asset management agencies of the empire, generating massive profits, which were then reinvested into the Mongols' military power and infrastructure. Under Mongol rule, the civil service examinations were suspended for a long time. While this was a catastrophe for the Han Chinese intellectual class, from the perspective of imperial management, it was a reduction of unnecessary administrative overhead. Imperial officials were required to speak multiple languages and understand diverse cultures. Bureaucrats fluent in Mongolian, Chinese, and Persian navigated the administrative networks, coordinating business across all of Eurasia. Complex rituals and justifications were omitted. Performance metrics, such as how much tax was collected and did the supplies arrive on time, became the sole criteria for evaluating an official's competence.
The Mongol Empire led technology convergence projects that combined the abundant resources of the Central Plain with the advanced scientific technology of the West. The Mongols brought engineers with sophisticated knowledge of mathematics and physics from the Islamic world to the Central Plain. Utilizing the vast timber and iron of the Central Plain, they manufactured siege weapons with destructive power far superior to existing catapults. Precision astronomical observation technology from the Islamic world was combined with the calendars of the Central Plain, and Western medicinal ingredients met Eastern medicine to provide high-level medical services across the empire. The Mongols utilized the Central Plain not as a mere occupied territory, but as a global R&D center where world knowledge converged and exploded.
Kublai Khan and the birth of Great Yuan.
Upon ascending to the throne of Great Khan in 1260, Kublai Khan left the isolated steppe of his ancestors, Karakoram, and established a base in Dadu, present-day Beijing, at the northern edge of the Central Plain. This was a highly brilliant site selection strategy. Dadu served as the interface between the Mongolian steppe and the agricultural zones of the Central Plain. It was a perfect logistical hub where one could gallop into the steppe on horseback or pull in resources from the south via the Grand Canal. Being not far from the sea, Dadu also functioned as the starting point for maritime trade routes reaching out to Goryeo, Japan, and Southeast Asia. From its inception, Dadu was planned and constructed as a global business center. Muslim architects participated in the design, creating a sophisticated grid-pattern city. They standardized road widths and fully equipped the city with sewage systems. This was an urban engineering design intended to accommodate a population of hundreds of thousands and the constant influx of merchants. Within Dadu, there were separate quarters where not only Mongols and Han Chinese, but also Persians, Arabs, and Europeans lived. Various languages were spoken here, and rare treasures from around the world were traded daily.
To sustain Dadu, Kublai Khan undertook massive civil engineering projects, specifically the renovation of the Grand Canal to directly transport the abundant grain of the southern Song region to Dadu. In the past, people had to rely on sea routes or treacherous land paths, but with the connection of the canal, southern rice and silk flowed into the northern headquarters, Dadu, on a large scale and at low cost. This canal became a powerful physical network unifying the economies of the north and south, and Dadu gained the power to exclusively consume and redistribute all these resources. Dadu was the first city in the world where jiacha, paper money, was fully circulated. Foreign merchants entering Dadu had to deposit the gold or silver they brought into the imperial treasury and exchange it for the paper currency, jiacha.
Through this, the Mongol Empire accumulated the world's precious metals in its corporate vault, while circulating paper money in the market to maximize capital liquidity. Kublai managed the economy of the entire empire by controlling the volume of banknotes issued in Dadu. This was, in effect, performing the role of a modern central bank 700 years ago. After the final annihilation of the Southern Song in 1279, the Yuan dynasty began to manage the population by strictly dividing them into 4 classes. This was more than simple racial discrimination. It was a precision human resource management system designed by a Mongol minority to efficiently control a massive population. As the top decision-makers, the Mongols maintained an absolute monopoly over the empire's military authority and core policy-making powers. No matter how capable, other ethnic groups were barred from military command, which was directly linked to the empire's survival. The Darugati, overseers, deployed across the country were exclusively Mongols, ensuring that local administrations never deviated from the empire's strategic direction, the interests of the Great Khan.
For the professional manager class, the Semuden, people with colored eyes, were assigned to financial and administrative affairs. Hailing from Central and Western Asia, they served as a buffer zone and a professional management group between the Mongols and the Han Chinese. As outsiders with no local ties to the Central Plain, they had to remain loyal solely to the Mongol imperial family to maintain their power. They were experts in mathematics, astronomy, and finance. The empire's complex tax calculations, exchange rate adjustments, and long-distance trade management all originated from their expertise. The Mongols granted them significant authority as middle managers to effectively control the Han Chinese.
The final subordinate labor classes, the Hanren, Han people from the north, formerly under the Jin dynasty, and the Nanren of the Southern Song, conquered last, were strictly assigned to the production sites. The Hanren were early partners, consisting of northern Han Chinese, Khitans, Georgians, and Goryeo people who had lived under the Jin. Because they surrendered or collaborated relatively early during the Mongol advance into the Central Plain, they earned a degree of trust from the Mongol imperial family. Consequently, they had more opportunities than the Nanren to be hired for lower-level administrative or technical positions, and were somewhat integrated into the imperial system, even serving as auxiliary units in the military.
The Nanren were the Han Chinese under the Southern Song, conquered last. Because they had fiercely resisted for decades until Kublai Khan finally brought down the Southern Song, the Mongols viewed them as potential insurgents and the most untrustworthy group. As such, they occupied the lowest of the 4 classes. Far from entering high-ranking positions, it was difficult for them to secure even low-level clerk jobs at the village level. Legal punishments were applied more strictly to them than to the Hanren, and they faced the harshest restrictions in daily life, including bans on carrying weapons or traveling at night. Although they accounted for over 90% of the population, their advancement to high office was virtually blocked. This was a form of defensive governance to prevent the majority from usurping management rights. Rather than Confucian governance, the Mongols demanded only that they dedicate themselves to farming and handicrafts to pay dividends, that is, taxes, to the empire. To resolve the high transportation costs of metallic currency and the shortage of raw materials, the Yuan dynasty established the world's first nationwide paper currency circulation system. Kublai Khan mandated the use of jiaoqiao for all transactions within the empire. When merchants carrying gold or silver entered Dadu, they deposited their metals into the imperial treasury and were issued jiaoqiao equivalent to that value. Along with the inscription, "This paper is the promise of the Great Khan," a rigorous security policy was implemented, making counterfeiting punishable by death. Consequently, jiaoqiao became the first global reserve currency in human history, circulating beyond the Central Plain into Central Asia and the West.
They did not merely print paper. To stabilize the value of jiaoqiao, the Mongols implemented a silver standard, stockpiling vast amounts of silver in the imperial vault. They kept their promise to exchange jiaoqiao for a fixed ratio of silver whenever a merchant requested it. Thanks to this fractional reserve system, merchants throughout Eurasia could travel thousands of kilometers with jiaoqiao in confidence. Vast amounts of silver flowed in from the West and Europe to purchase the silk and ceramics of the Central Plain.
By dominating this silver, the Mongols performed the role of a global central bank, controlling the flow of world finance. They did not merely print paper. To stabilize the value of jiaoqiao, the Mongols implemented a silver standard, stockpiling vast amounts of silver in the imperial vault. They kept their promise to exchange jiaoqiao for a fixed ratio of silver whenever a merchant requested it. Thanks to this fractional reserve system, merchants throughout Eurasia could travel thousands of kilometers with jiaoqiao in confidence. Vast amounts of silver flowed in from the West and Europe to purchase the silk and ceramics of the Central Plain. By dominating this silver, the Mongols performed the role of a global central bank, controlling the flow of world finance.
Pax Mongolica and the Golden Age of the Semuren. In the early 1300s, the Central Plain under Mongol rule was the center of an unprecedented Pax Mongolica in human history. To unify payment methods across Eurasia, the Mongols circulated the world's first nationwide paper currency, jiaoqiao, and established a silver standard by linking it to physical silver. At that time, silver was not merely a precious metal, but a global reserve currency that bound the entire empire together. The Mongols exported the vast goods of the Central Plain, silk, ceramics, etc., to the West, drawing the world's silver into Dadu, Beijing, in return. The silver thus secured became the reserve that guaranteed the value of jiaoqiao, maximizing the empire's creditworthiness. During this period, the Central Plain was a massive global market. Via the Mongol jam system, Persian spices, Indian gems, and European furs poured into Dadu, while Central Plain silk and ceramics were exported worldwide in exchange. Rather than simply ruling the Central Plain, the Mongols transformed it into a massive financial terminal for the Eurasian economic network and the world's largest logistics hub.
The practical protagonists who operated this vast financial system were the Semuren. Serving as the Mongol imperial family's fund managers and trade agencies, they operated complex exchange rate calculations and long-distance credit settlement systems. Their pragmatic management mindset, unencumbered by Confucian justifications, turned Pax Mongolica into not just a simple peace, but a profitable peace. The streets of Dadu were a venue for global business, where the world's languages mingled, and the Yuan dynasty of this era was in both name and reality the central control room of the global economy.
An unexpected crisis, the collapse of the global supply chain.
In the mid-14th century, the Black Death swept across Eurasia, striking the Mongol Empire's core infrastructure, the JAM postal station system. As the JAM stations, the channels for information and goods, became conduits for the plague, the Mongols had no choice but to shut down the network. With logistics halted, the production bases in the Central Plain became isolated, and the empire's profitability plummeted. Estimates of China's population decline during this period vary, but it is generally thought to have dropped from approximately 120 million to 60 million. This pandemic-driven depopulation led to labor shortages and a massive tax deficit. While the fixed costs of maintaining the massive corporate entity remained the same, tax revenues evaporated, pushing the empire's finances to the brink of bankruptcy. To overcome the financial crisis, the Mongol management made a fatal misstep. They recklessly printed jiaoqiao, paper money, without the backing of physical silver. As the market was flooded with paper currency, prices skyrocketed. The economy was paralyzed to the point where a wagon full of banknotes was needed to buy a single sack of rice. As the credit guaranteed by the Mongol Empire vanished, the discontent of the subject Han Chinese reached a breaking point. Eventually, rebel forces known as the Red Turbans rose across the land, threatening the empire's management rights.
By the 1360s, the Central Plain, the Yuan dynasty, was no longer an asset generating profit for the empire. The labor force had been halved by the plague, and the monetary system was paralyzed by hyperinflation. A deficit structure became entrenched, where the military costs to suppress nationwide rebellions exceeded the taxes collected. Maintaining a forced occupation of the Central Plain with a severed jam network meant abandoning the Mongol cavalry's greatest strength, mobility, and becoming trapped within city walls. In 1368, as the forces of the Ming dynasty, a Han Chinese rebel power, advanced near Dadu, Beijing, the last great Khan, Togon Temur, chose a strategic retreat rather than falling with the city. He opened the north gate of Dadu and departed for the steppe, leading the imperial family, core officials, and elite Mongol cavalry. This was a decision to abandon the fixed asset of city walls while preserving the intangible assets of the Mongol essence, its human resources and military technology. To the Mongol management, the Central Plain was merely a massive factory. When the factory became inoperable, they relocated their headquarters to their home base on the Mongolian steppe without hesitation. The Mongols who returned to the steppe did not perish. They reorganized their headquarters under the name Northern Yuan. Warriors who had become bureaucratized within city walls returned to their saddles. Over the following decades, they transitioned to a guerrilla-style revenue model, striking the Ming borders and once again extracting resources from the Central Plain. While Chinese historiography views this as the fall of the Yuan dynasty, from the perspective of global business history, it was an event where the Central Plain division with its excessive maintenance costs was shuttered and operations were reshored to the home base.
Attempting to incorporate the Yuan dynasty simply as one of China's dynasties is to miss the grand context of history. Strictly speaking, the Yuan was a core subsidiary operated by the Eurasian holding company known as the Mongol Empire. The emperor of the Yuan was simultaneously the Great Khan, the head of all Mongol Ulus, nations worldwide. Their governing ideology was not the Confucian mandate of heaven, but rather the Great Jasa, Mongol law, rooted in the pragmatism and mobility of the steppe. To the Mongols, the Central Plain was not a territory to be assimilated into, but a strategic hub supporting the logistics and finances of the entire empire. The reason they headed north without hesitation upon leaving Dadu was their realization that their essence lay not within city walls, but in a connected network.
The Mongol Empire transformed the previously closed agricultural civilization of the Central Plain into the protagonist of a massive single market spanning Eurasia. Without the logistics, jam, and currency, silver standard, established by the Mongols, the goods of the Central Plain could never have reached the world so extensively. By combining the capital of the Central Plain with the technology of the West, the Mongols created the preeminent scientific and technological state of the era. This represented a peak of global standards that Chinese history could hardly have reached indigenously. The fact that subsequent dynasties rebuilt walls and closed their doors serves as counter-evidence of their lack of capacity to maintain the open system built by the Mongols. The claim that we absorbed them is merely a teleological interpretation. In reality, it was more akin to a massive Mongol management team experimenting with the largest economic community in human history via the platform of the Central Plain. During their stay, the Mongols utilized local culture as an efficient management tool to secure practical interests rather than seeking to destroy it.
The Mongol Empire poses a vital question to us. Is it more important to occupy territory or to dominate the value that flows through it? The Yuan dynasty was a massive station where the Mongols briefly stayed to manage the world. While the masters of the city walls changed countless times, the power of connection and pragmatic governance proven by the Mongols remain the archetypes of the values sought by today's global society. Through the Yuan dynasty, we should not view the history of China, but rather the cornerstone of globalization designed by the Mongols.